The woman at the county records office didn't even look up when she said it. I'm sorry. Your name isn't on the family tree anymore. For a second, I thought I'd heard her wrong. What do you mean, anymore? Now she looked at me. Her expression softened the way people look at strangers right before delivering bad news. I mean exactly that. According to the latest records your parents submitted to the Historical Society, you were removed. My fingers tightened around the faded folder I'd carried across 3 states. Removed. Not forgotten. Not missing. Erased. Like I had never existed. Around me, families laughed as they searched through old photographs and handwritten records displayed inside glass cases. Children pointed at ancestors from 100 years ago while grandparents proudly told stories. I stood there staring at a computer screen that insisted I wasn't part of my own family anymore. The woman hesitated. Are you okay? I swallowed hard. My parents are still alive. She nodded slowly. I know. Those 3 words hurt more than anything else. Because someone still alive had made a choice. Someone had looked at my name and decided it no longer belonged. I left the building without another word. Outside, rain had started falling. Not enough to send people running. Just enough to blur the windshield as I sat inside my old pickup truck, unable to start the engine. My phone buzzed. It was my younger sister, Emily. I watched it ring until it stopped. A second later, a text appeared. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder? I laughed once. It sounded nothing like laughter. I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 2 years. Not because I wanted distance, but because every conversation ended the same way. You've always made this family difficult. That sentence followed me my entire life. Growing up, I believed it. Now, I wasn't so sure. I was born and raised in a quiet town outside Lexington, Kentucky. Nothing about our family looked unusual from the outside. My dad, Richard, owned a hardware store. My mom, Linda, volunteered at church every Sunday. Emily was 2 years younger than me and somehow always knew exactly what to say to make people smile. Then there was me. The kid who asked too many questions. The kid who never quite fit. When neighbors stopped by, Dad would wrap an arm around Emily's shoulders. That's my girl. If they noticed me standing nearby, he'd nod politely. And that's Daniel. Never. My son. Just Daniel. It was subtle enough that nobody else seemed to notice. But kids notice everything. Especially the things adults think they're hiding. When I was 8 years old, I found our family photo album stacked inside a hallway closet. Emily's baby pictures filled page after page. Her first steps. Her first birthday. Her first day of school. Then I searched for mine. There were only a handful. Mom walked in while I was flipping through the pages. What are you doing? Looking for my baby pictures. She crossed the room a little too quickly and closed the album. Some things got lost when we moved. We had never moved. I remember that because we'd lived in the same white farmhouse my entire life. At 8 years old, I accepted the answer anyway. Kids trust their parents. Even when the stories don't make sense. Dad believed every problem could be solved with hard work. Unless the problem was me. When I brought home straight A's, he'd say, "Good. That's what you're supposed to do." When Emily earned a B on a science test, he'd take the family out for ice cream because she had worked so hard. If I fixed the fence, he'd point out the spot I missed. If Emily watered the flowers, he'd tell everyone what a responsible young woman she was. It wasn't cruelty. Not exactly. It was something colder. Indifference. Like I reminded him of something he'd rather forget. Mom wasn't much different. She wasn't mean. She just stayed quiet. Every time Dad dismissed me, she'd lower her eyes and keep washing dishes or folding laundry. As if silence hurt less than speaking. For years I convinced myself I was imagining it. Until high school. I was 16 when Coach Harris pulled me aside after football practice. "You got colleges looking at you." I almost laughed. No, they aren't. They are. He handed me 3 letters. Scholarship interest. I'd never seen Dad smile wider than he did when Emily won a local singing competition. When I placed those scholarship letters on the kitchen table, he barely glanced at them. So, colleges want me. You planning on paying for that yourself? The excitement disappeared from the room. I thought maybe. You thought wrong. Mom reached toward the letters. Dad moved them aside before she could touch them. We need you here after graduation. Why? The store. I don't want to spend my life at the hardware store. His chair scraped across the floor. You think you're better than this family? No. You sure sound like it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Not because college suddenly felt impossible. Because for the first time, I wondered if Dad actually wanted me to leave. Coach Harris refused to let me quit. If your parents won't help, we'll find another way. He spent weeks helping me fill out financial aid forms. Teachers wrote recommendation letters. Neighbors held a small fundraiser without me knowing. When I received a full scholarship to the University of Tennessee, I ran home with the acceptance letter shaking in my hands. Mom cried. For one beautiful second, I thought she was happy. Then she whispered, Your father isn't going to like this. She wasn't wrong. Dad stared at the letter, folded it once, twice, then slid it back across the table. If you walk out that door for college. He paused. Don't expect to come back asking for anything. The room went silent. I waited. Surely Mom would say something. Anything. Instead, she looked down at her coffee cup. I understand your father's concerns. Those words echoed inside me long after I packed my bags. When I drove away 2 weeks later, Coach Harris hugged me. My parents stayed on the porch. Either of them waved. College changed my life. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. I worked nights loading delivery trucks. Skipped meals to save money. Shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates who argued about everything. But for the first time, people wanted me around. Professors remembered my name. Friends invited me over for Thanksgiving because they knew I couldn't afford to go home. One family in particular took me in. The Millers. Mike and Susan Miller had 3 sons. Every Sunday they'd squeeze another chair around the dinner table. Mine. One evening Susan handed me a second helping of mashed potatoes. You've gotten too skinny. I smiled. My mom used to say that. When was the last time you saw her? I counted backward. Almost a year. She frowned. That's a long time. It happens. No, she said gently. It shouldn't. Her words stayed with me for weeks. Because deep down, I'd started believing my family was normal. Maybe it wasn't. After graduation, I found work as a civil engineer in Nashville. The job wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Building things made sense. Bridges either stood, or they didn't. People weren't that simple. I called home every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day. Most conversations lasted less than 5 minutes. Dad always seemed busy. Mom always sounded tired. Emily was the only one who really talked. Come visit. I'd like that. But somehow, it never happened. There was always an excuse. Dad had inventory. Mom wasn't feeling well. The house needed repairs. Years slipped away. Then one October afternoon, Emily called crying. You need to come home. My stomach dropped. What happened? It's Mom. I drove 4 hours without stopping. When I reached the hospital, Mom was sitting upright in bed, pale but smiling. Heart scare. Nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over me. Until Dad walked into the room. He looked at me like I'd shown up uninvited. You didn't have to come. Emily stared at him. Dad? I'm serious. I looked between them. I thought Mom was sick. We had it handled. Mom reached for my hand. Dad noticed. His face hardened. Visiting hours ended an hour later. As I leaned over to hug Mom goodbye, she whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Her eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Dad." She let go of my hand immediately. "Drive safely." That was it. No explanation. No answers. Just two words that haunted me all the way back to Nashville. "I'm sorry." For months, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Then, on a cold January morning, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't addressed by hand. It came from the Bluegrass Heritage Historical Society. Inside was an invitation to the annual Family Lineage Exhibition, an event celebrating generations of Kentucky families. My parents' family had participated for decades. At the bottom of the letter was a note that made my pulse slow. "Recent updates have been made to your family's official genealogy records. If you believe any information is inaccurate, please contact us before the public exhibition." I frowned. Recent updates? I picked up my phone and called Emily. She answered on the second ring. Before I could say a word, she whispered, "Daniel." Her voice cracked. "I was hoping that letter wouldn't reach you." My heart began pounding. "What did they change?" She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly said something that made every hair on my arms stand up. "You need to see it with your own eyes, because if I tell you over the phone, you'll never believe me." I barely slept that night. Emily's words kept replaying in my head. "You'll never believe me." By sunrise, I was already on the highway back to Kentucky. The closer I got to home, the tighter my chest felt. Every mile brought back memories I'd spent years trying to bury. The old gas station where Dad taught Emily how to pump gas. The diner where we celebrated her birthday every year. The baseball field where he'd watched her sing the national anthem, but skipped the championship game where I hit the winning run. Some places never changed. Some wounds didn't either. The Historical Society occupied an old brick courthouse in the center of town. Volunteers greeted visitors with coffee and warm smiles. None of them recognized me. I walked straight to the genealogy display. There it was. A massive family tree stretching across an entire wall. Generations of names connected by neat black lines. Grandparents. Great-grandparents. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Emily. My parents. And then, nothing. The line that should have led to me ended in empty space. It looked as if Richard and Linda had only ever had one child. Emily. I stared so long that the letters blurred. A volunteer approached carefully. "Can I help you?" I pointed at the tree. "My name used to be there." Her smile faded. "Oh." She seemed to realize who I was. "We were told the correction had already been discussed with the family." "Correction?" She hesitated. "Your parents submitted legal documents requesting the update." Legal documents. Not a mistake. Not an accident. Paperwork. Signatures. A decision. My phone vibrated. "Emily." "I'm outside," she whispered. I found her sitting in her car with both hands gripping the steering wheel. She looked older than I remembered. More tired. "I'm sorry," she said before I even closed the door. "Did you know?" She nodded. "For how long?" "Almost 6 months." "You watched them erase me?" Tears filled her eyes. "I begged them not to." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because Mom made me promise." I looked away. "So Mom knew." Emily's silence answered for her. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope. "I wasn't supposed to show you this." Inside was a photocopy of the request my parents had filed. I recognized Dad's signature instantly. Mom's sat just beneath it. The reason for the amendment was only one sentence long. "Individual listed in error." Individual listed in error. I wasn't their son anymore. I was a clerical mistake. I handed the paper back before my hands started shaking. "Tell me the truth." Emily wiped her eyes. "I don't know everything." "What do you know?" She stared through the windshield. "When I was little, I heard Mom and Dad arguing. About me? She nodded. Dad kept saying, he can never find out. A chill ran through me. What can I find out? I don't know. You never asked? I was 10. She looked at me with guilt written across her face. I was scared. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she said something that caught me completely off guard. Have you ever noticed you don't look like us? I laughed without humor. I've noticed. Dad had dark hair. Mom had dark hair. Emily had dark hair. Mine had always been light brown. Dad's eyes were green. Mom's were hazel. Emily's were green. Mine were blue. Growing up, everyone joked that I must have inherited some distant relative's features. Now those jokes didn't feel funny anymore. Emily swallowed hard. Daniel. What? I think you should take a DNA test. The words landed like a stone. I wanted to reject the idea. Instead, I realized I'd already been wondering the same thing. The kit arrived 5 days later. I almost threw it away twice. Part of me wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. Maybe Dad hated me. Maybe there had been some legal dispute. Maybe. Anything except what my mind kept whispering. I finally mailed the sample. Then I waited. 2 weeks. 3. 4. Every notification on my phone made my heart jump. At work I couldn't focus. At night I kept remembering Mom whispering, I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For staying silent? For lying? Or for something much bigger? Then one Friday afternoon my phone buzzed. Your DNA results are ready. I sat frozen in my office. The cursor hovered over the screen. Open results. I clicked. The ethnicity estimate loaded first. It meant nothing to me. Then came the family matches. A message appeared across the top. Close family match found. I frowned. I expected Emily. Maybe a cousin. Instead, the first name wasn't familiar at all. Sarah Whitmore. Predicted relationship. Half-sibling. Half-sibling? I stared at the screen. No. That had to be wrong. I clicked her profile. Age. 42. She lived in Ohio. 2 years older than me. There was no Sarah in our family. No Whitmore relatives. Nothing. Then another match appeared. Michael Whitmore. Predicted relationship. Uncle. My pulse hammered inside my ears. An uncle I'd never heard of. I leaned back in my chair. Either the test was completely wrong, or my entire life had been. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I ignored those calls. This time I answered. Hello? Silence. Then a woman's nervous voice. Daniel? Yes. My name is Sarah. My breath caught. Sarah Whitmore? Yes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally she whispered. I've been waiting for this phone call for almost 20 years. What are you talking about? I knew someday you'd take one of these tests. You knew me? No. I knew about you. Every instinct told me to hang up. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning inside me. Who are you? She took a shaky breath. I think. Her voice cracked. I think I'm your sister. My world stopped. I don't have another sister. You do. No. You do. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward. You're wrong. I wish I were. How do you know my name? Because my father never stopped looking for you. My heart pounded. What father? There was another long silence. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. His name wasn't Richard. I couldn't breathe. The next morning I drove to Ohio. 7 hours. Almost the entire trip I considered turning around. Maybe this was a scam. Maybe someone had hacked the DNA database. Maybe grief had made people imagine connections that weren't real. But when I pulled into the driveway of a small farmhouse outside Columbus, an older man stepped onto the porch. The moment I saw him, Every doubt disappeared. He looked like I was staring 25 years into my own future. Same blue eyes. Same nose. Same jaw. Even the way he tilted his head. He wasn't a stranger. He was my reflection. He didn't move. Neither did I. Finally he whispered, "My God!" His knees nearly gave out. Sarah rushed to steady him. He never looked away from me. "I've waited 40 years. I slowly walked toward the porch. "Who are you?" Tears rolled down his face. "My name is Thomas Whitmore." His voice trembled. "And," he swallowed, "I'm your father." The words hit me like a freight train. "No." He nodded through tears. "Yes." I stepped backward. "No. Richard is my father." Thomas closed his eyes. "He raised you. Then what are you talking about?" Sarah quietly handed me a worn photograph. It showed a young man holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The man was Thomas. The baby looked exactly like the infant in the few baby pictures my mother had kept. On the back, faded handwriting read, "Thomas and baby Daniel. July 14th. My birthday." I couldn't speak. Thomas reached into his shirt pocket and unfolded a tiny hospital bracelet he'd carried for decades. Printed across the faded plastic were the words, "Baby Boy Whitmore. Birth date. My birth date. Hospital." The same hospital listed on my birth certificate. I looked from the bracelet to the photograph, then back at Thomas. Only one question escaped my lips. "If you're my father..." I could barely force out the next words. "Then why did Richard and Linda raise me?" Thomas's eyes filled with pain. He looked toward Sarah, then back at me. "Because..." His voice broke. "They told the court I abandoned you." And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized the story he'd been told since childhood wasn't just incomplete. It had been built on a lie. Thomas's words hung in the air. "They told the court I abandoned you." I wanted to call him a liar. I wanted to grab my keys, drive back to Kentucky, and forget I'd ever walked onto that porch. Instead, I looked into his eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't angry. They were tired. The kind of tired that only comes from carrying the same pain for decades. "I don't believe you," I said quietly. He nodded. "I wouldn't either." Without another word, he disappeared inside the house. Sarah and I stood in silence. A minute later, Thomas returned carrying an old metal box. The corners were rusted. A strip of faded masking tape across the top read only one word. "Daniel." He placed it gently on the porch table. "I stopped opening this years ago," he said. "It hurt too much." My hands hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were dozens of letters. Every envelope had my name on it. Some were addressed to my childhood home. Others to my college apartment. A few even had my office address. None had ever reached me. Every single one had been returned. Some were stamped, "Returned to sender." Others carried handwritten notes. "Recipient no longer lives here." One simply read, "Do not contact this family again." I picked up the oldest letter. The postmark was from the week after my 5th birthday. The envelope had never been opened. Thomas looked away. I wrote every birthday. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple card. "Happy birthday, buddy. I hope you're growing strong. I think about you every day. I love you more than you'll ever know." There wasn't a single cruel word. Not one accusation. Just love. I couldn't stop reading. Birthday after birthday. Christmas after Christmas. Graduation. Every milestone I thought he'd missed. He'd written about. He just never had the chance to tell me. My vision blurred. "I don't understand." Thomas took a slow breath. "Neither do I." He sat across from me. "Your mother and I were young." He smiled sadly. "We weren't perfect. We argued sometimes. But we loved you. What happened? We divorced when you were 3. I nodded slowly. "I knew none of this." I know. He rubbed his hands together. The court gave us shared custody. So why didn't I ever see you? I did, at first. He reached into the box again. This time he handed me a stack of photographs. There I was. 4 years old. Fishing with Thomas. Eating ice cream. Sitting on his shoulders at the county fair. I stared at the pictures. I remembered none of them. Those visits stopped suddenly. He continued. Your mother filed an emergency petition. Why? She claimed you came home frightened after spending time with me. My stomach tightened. But that wasn't true. No. What happened? Thomas looked like he'd replayed the memory 1,000 times. I walked into court believing everything would be cleared up. He swallowed. It wasn't. They believed her? They believed Richard. I frowned. Richard? He testified. My dad? He wasn't your stepfather yet. Thomas nodded slowly. They had already started seeing each other. The room spun. So, they were together before the divorce was final. I stared at the floor. Every piece of my childhood was shifting beneath my feet. Thomas continued quietly. They painted me as unstable. Were you? No. They said I drank. Did you? I had a beer now and then. They said I was violent. Were you? His eyes met mine. Never. He reached into the box one last time. A folded document rested beneath the letters. Family court order. The judge had suspended his visitation. Temporarily. Thomas laughed bitterly. Temporary lasted 40 years. But why? I appealed. And? I lost. Again? I kept losing. His shoulders sagged. Eventually your mother and Richard moved. They never told you where? No. I hired private investigators. Nothing. I searched social media. Nothing. I even drove through towns hoping someone would recognize your picture. Sarah quietly wiped her eyes. He never missed your birthday, she whispered. Every year he'd bake a cake. I looked at her. He did? She nodded. He'd light one candle. And? He'd say, maybe next year. I closed my eyes. For 40 years. A man I'd never known had celebrated my birthday alone. I drove back to Kentucky the next morning. Not because I had answers. Because I needed them. My parents' farmhouse looked exactly the same. Fresh paint. Trimmed grass. The porch swing Dad built 20 years earlier. Only this time. It didn't feel like home. Dad opened the door. His face hardened immediately. What are you doing here? I know. His expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. I met Thomas. For the first time in my life. Richard looked afraid. Mom appeared behind him. The color drained from her face. Oh no. Dad turned sharply. You talked to him? I know everything. No. I've seen the court papers. His jaw tightened. They're lying. I've seen the letters. Silence. I've seen the pictures. Still nothing. Finally I looked at Mom. Tell me the truth. Her lips trembled. Richard answered instead. There's nothing to tell. I ignored him. Mom. She couldn't meet my eyes. Mom. A tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. Finally. She whispered. He never abandoned you. Richard slammed his fist against the wall. Linda. But she was done protecting him. He fought for you. She began crying openly. For years. I felt my knees weaken. Then why? She covered her face. I was scared. Of what? Losing you? You already had me. I knew. So why keep me from him? She looked toward Richard. He said. Her voice cracked. He said if Thomas stayed in your life, we'd never be a real family. I turned slowly toward Richard. You did this? His answer came without shame. I raised you. That's not what I asked? I was there. You stole me. I gave you a better life. You erased my father. He wasn't good enough. You don't get to decide that. His face turned red. I fed you. You lied to me. I clothed you. You erased my name. I made you who you are. No. For the first time, I didn't feel like the scared little boy desperate for his approval. I became who I am despite you. The room fell silent. Mom sobbed quietly. Richard looked away. He knew. For the first time, he had nothing left to defend. Emily arrived 20 minutes later. She froze when she saw all three of us standing in the living room. I knew this day would come, she whispered. Mom reached for her. Emily stepped back. You lied to me too. I was trying to protect everyone. No. Emily shook her head. You were protecting a secret. She walked over and hugged me. I'm sorry. I hugged her back. You were a kid. So were you. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, Mom disappeared upstairs. She returned carrying a small wooden box. I should have given you this years ago. Inside was everything she'd hidden. Hospital photographs. Original birth records. Custody papers. Even the tiny blue blanket from the picture Thomas had shown me. At the very bottom lay a sealed envelope. Across the front, in Mom's handwriting, were 4 words. For Daniel. One day. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was dated 20 years earlier. If you're reading this, I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. Thomas loved you. He never stopped. Richard asked me to choose between my past and my future. I chose wrong. Every birthday, I wondered if you'd hate me when you learned the truth. You would have every right. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope someday you'll meet the father who never gave up looking for you. The paper slipped from my hands. Mom stood there crying. I'm so sorry. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since childhood. When did you erase my name? She closed her eyes. Richard submitted the papers. You signed them. I know. Why? She looked broken. He said if anyone ever found out, everyone would hate us. I nodded slowly. He was wrong. A month later, the Bluegrass Heritage Historical Society held another public meeting. This time, I wasn't there to disappear. I was there because the records had been challenged. The evidence was undeniable. The original birth certificate, court files, DNA results, photographs, letters. The board voted unanimously. My name was restored. But not just restored. The family tree was corrected. For the first time, it showed the truth. Daniel Whitmore, son of Thomas Whitmore and Linda Carter. Adopted by Richard Carter after remarriage. Nothing hidden. Nothing erased. As people gathered around the display, Thomas stood beside me. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. 40 years of silence couldn't be fixed in a day. But they could begin to heal. Richard never apologized. Not really. He sent one short letter. I did what I thought was best. For the first time in my life. That answer wasn't enough. I never wrote back. Mom did. Not once. Not twice. But every week. Sometimes she wrote about memories. Sometimes about regrets. Sometimes there were only 2 words. I'm sorry. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some scars never completely disappear. But little by little, something new took their place. Peace. I started spending weekends with Thomas. We fished. We argued over baseball. We laughed about how both of us burned pancakes. It felt awkward sometimes. Then natural. Then normal. One afternoon, while cleaning his garage, he handed me a small cardboard box. I've been saving these. Inside were 40 birthday candles. One for every year we'd lost. That evening, Sarah baked a cake. Thomas placed every candle on top. The flames filled the room with warm golden light. He looked at me, smiling through tears. I guess I don't have to celebrate alone anymore. I smiled back. No. I took a deep breath. You never did stop being my father. His eyes filled again. And you never stopped being my son. The candles flickered between us. Not as a reminder of the years that had been stolen, but as proof that even the deepest truth, buried for decades, has a way of finding the light. And this time, no one could ever erase my name again.